Hi, I'm Pete Andresen with Andresen & Associates. Thanks for watching. And happy year of the snake. According to Asian cosmology and their lunar calendar, this is going to be the year of the snake, and it's going to feature a lot of self-discovery, challenge, and a bit of deception, apparently. So far, the astrology is on target for the year. Let's start with this graph. Okay, this is something to keep in mind. I want you to check out these wonderful returns for the last 15 years. What challenges we face going forward this year, we have to keep this in mind, that investing has been astonishingly successful after taxes and expenses and chaos. It's probably been and when you consider the costs of a mortgage, investing in equities in a diversified portfolio has been as successful as a lot of real estate investing. $10,000 became $71,000 in the Vanguard S&P 500 index fund in the last 15 years. Even conservative, very conservative, 60% bonds, 40% stock, and the worst bond market in 90 years has still seen Vanguard Wellesley produce $25,000 from a $10,000 investment. So diversified investing has worked. However, there's a big caveat here. Take a look at this graph. This is the first decade of the 21st century. And it was predicted in the 1990s by valuation. When valuation got extreme, this decade resulted. And during that decade, the Vanguard Index 500 actually at some points was down 50% or so from its starting value. It came back so that it finished with a loss. But remember, a decade is a long time. A decade is, people give up in a decade. It's also worth noting that international investing did really, really well in the form of First Eagle. First Eagle was exceptional, but international investing still did rather well. And Vanguard Wellesley, that old conservative 60% bond, 40% stock, did so well, relatively speaking, that it basically outperformed the S&P 500 for about 17 years. So what does that mean? That means investing can be very, very, very successful. It means investing has risks. It means that valuations do tell us the future a little bit. Obviously not. We can see it coming, but they can't see when. That's why we're diversified, because of the unexpected. The other thing I would point out, let's get this 10-year graph back here. Okay. This is life-changing. If you're in a retirement plan payout of some kind, this kind of stuff is life-changing. Life-changing. You alter your life's trajectory, as is, now for the good news, this graph. So yes, we want risk, but we want careful, mindful risk so that we can garner those returns without having a life-changing event. Because in the long run, investing is very, very successful. Which brings us to the current day. So, happy year of the snake. Now, each year we send out our little red packets, and the reason we send them out is to wish you genuinely, personally, a wonderful, prosperous year, as good as it can be. And we genuinely wish that to you. We care about your wealth. We want you to be financially and personally successful this year, and that's why we send it out. This year, As always, we enclose money, and the money usually relates to what happened last year and what life lessons we can derive from that. This year, we're straight from the Bank of Syria. We've got Syrian bills, and that's to emphasize one of the lessons of 2024. And that is that trends go on and trends go on, and people tend to think that tomorrow will be just like today. Essentially, it'll be like today. In Syria in 2024, tomorrow was not like today. The Assad regime had been in place for decades, a brutal, cruel, oppressive regime that used poison gas on innocent civilians, not a bunch of nice people. But if you had asked the dictator 5 years ago, hey, Bashar, what's going to be your life here? He would have said, I'm going to be dictator of Syria for my life. And now he's in Moscow. So life changed very, very fast in Syria. And life can change, in fact, will change in various ways, some good, some not good, very, very quickly. Tomorrow may or may not look like today. Trends tend to go on for a long time. But when they can change abruptly, as is happening right now with the tariffs and the new regime in Washington. Now, we've had an abrupt change with the United States relationship with the rest of the world, and frankly, it makes me very uncomfortable. It's a new era of antagonism, chaos, uncertainty, vindictiveness, and this will certainly have consequences in the financial markets unexpectedly. Possibly big, possibly not, because it's possible that the consequences of all this chaos will be ameliorated by the rise of AI. So we can't tell what those consequences are yet, and it's really important not to overreact because that can damage us as well. The threat of a new trade war was announced last weekend by the new government, and then they walked it back Monday morning. And on Monday, I was at my computer staring fixedly at the screen, and I watched the stock market open, and for a few hours there, I got to see what would happen in our portfolios if we did have a financial shock, because we haven't really had one yet. And I noticed several things before Mexico and Canada both were able to negotiate a 1-month delay. The stock market went down a lot in that moment, and had the reality of a real trade war impacted, it would have gone down more. But here's the magic. Our bonds, especially our treasury bonds, went up. They went way up as investors flocked to treasuries as a safe harbor. Isn't that great? Gold went up. International equities did not crash abnormally. So diversification worked for those brief few hours. It worked. Now, what next? Well, we're diversified, so we're there. It's going to take a cannon to blow a hole in what we're doing. It could happen, and in fact, any downturn is likely to impact even conservative portfolios like Vanguard Wellesley, but not crunch them. We may be walking an historical path that is successful for the United States, which we haven't experienced in our lifetimes, but history doesn't support that perception. History supports the idea that eventually the other side gets badgered into a response, as is the case with all bullies. Eventually, if a person or an entity gets bullied long enough, they respond, and sometimes they respond with their fists. A trade war didn't happen. The stock market has gone back up, and thank heaven that we did not rebalance our S&P 500 holdings yet, because it went back up. But this is going to be a new era of uncertainty, and we don't know what will happen. And simply mean-spiritedness on an individual level is going to bleed out into our society and make news watching less and less attractive. The Federal Reserve is a guardrail. That was pointed out to me, and I embrace that. The Federal Reserve is a guardrail as long as they can stay independent, because they will simply not reduce interest rates to enable folly, I hope. They've been very, very, very good in the past. Uneven. Sometimes they make mistakes, but mostly they've been great. The courts have been great. Yesterday, I had a meeting with representatives of Vanguard. And remember, Vanguard is unique because it's owned by the shareholders. It's owned by you and me, the shareholders of mutual funds. So Vanguard is utterly on the side of investors, and they're not trading against us like most of the big Wall Street houses. So here's Vanguard's 10-year expectations again. Check out what they're implying about international investing. Traditionally, our Asian New Year mailing is a discussion of international, and check out what they're saying. And the reason, again, the broken record, Peter Andreessen, the broken record. Here we go again. Look at the third line down. Global equities ex-US developed 7.3% to 9.3% going forward from right here, right now, for the next decade. Bottom line, US equities 2.8 to 4.8%. Built into that, obviously, that's a grotesque underperformance. It's looking a lot, as I've said in past videos, it's looking a lot like what we were looking at in the late 1990s. And look at global bonds and US bonds. Basically, what that's saying is that essentially it's right where it is right now. They're not apparently seeing any long-term systemic changes to the bond market at this time. So what you see is what you get. A 4.5% dividend or yield right now in a bond or a dividend producing equity is actually attractive. Now I'm going to throw a downer into this. And this is to emphasize the point. This is the Japanese stock market, the Nikkei 2025 or 225 index. It's essentially the S&P 500 for the Japanese stock market. It had a big year in 2024, and here's why. On February 22nd, 2024, it finally regained the high that it had reached in 1989. It took 34 years to recover. Some points. There's 3 points I want to make here. First, valuation suggested beforehand that this might happen at the top, and it was sneered at during the bubble. Everybody had all kinds of reasons why valuation wouldn't work, but yet valuation did. The second comment is, wouldn't it have been nice to have the money and other investments so that you could buy at the low point, like about 2010, or somewhere in there, somewhere down low? You can't pick lows, but you can buy when things are fairly valued. And the other point that's really worth emphasizing is I do not see the United States, I could be wrong, but I don't see the United States stock market doing that because valuations are not even remotely close to the overvaluations we had in Japan. To take a step back to 1989 for the Japanese, it's important to remember that Japan was regarded as the economic power globally. I mean, American business schools were studying the Japanese miracle. And we can all remember when the Japanese were buying a lot of real estate in the United States, including Pebble Beach. But at the peak in 1989, Japanese shares accounted for 45% of the global stock market, and the United States was only at 33%. And these days, it is 6% of the global stock market. The Nikkei all total is not it's not even worth as much as Apple and Nvidia. In 1989, real estate values had soared as well. The 3.4 kilometers, at 1.31 square miles occupied by the Imperial Palace, was allegedly worth more than the entire real estate value of California. Boy, doesn't that scream bubble? I want to emphasize that valuations in the United States are nowhere near the Japanese levels in 1989. But there's a point, and that is that the Japanese in 1988, 1987, 1986 perceived that this would be the way it was forever. They perceived that their mastery of the world's economic platform was absolute. They were absolutely confident that they knew what would happen next. And they believed that the world would, to quote our current president, knuckle under. And in the middle of all this, well, if you're hearing noises, because we got a storm going outside and getting some delicious rain. So that sound is the sound of money being made in Salinas Valley agriculture. 2024's Davos Economic Forum. That's when the super wealthy of the world fly in their private jets, their gas-guzzling private jets. They fly into Davos, Switzerland for a week of partying and dictation to the world about what they think is important. And what's interesting about Davos, the annual economic forum there, is that they always focus on the buzziest topic and very, very rarely actually proactively look forward to what's going to happen next. Last year, they were convinced that the United States is dominant, will always be dominant, and will stay dominant forever. What do you think? Well, I'm not selling my American holdings. John Bogle said that no international holdings would suit you just fine, but I am saying, with valuations the way they are, historically international has made sense. I'm going to put this graph up again, because we want to dwell on this. We want to keep our eyes on the prize. We are poised to buy any good bargains. We're essentially in a Wellesley portfolio, most of us, and I look forward to going into something more. We've been waiting for years. Something will happen and we'll be there. Thank you for your patience. I don't know about you, but this long, dragged-out recovery from COVID 2020 is getting old. And we're all facing the everybody's getting rich but me feeling. That may change in coming years. And it's worse because the investors who had the least regard for common sense and moderation, who put it all in technology and Bitcoin, have gotten the richest. So let's keep our eyes on the prize, because valuations tell us that diversified works in the long run. So I'm going to leave you with this video on YouTube of a man who had never been bitten by a snake. And he decided that since he had never been bitten by a snake, he never would be bitten by a snake. And he played with snakes, and he died of a snake bite. So you may not want to watch it, but if you want to see another demonstration of the fact that the world can change suddenly, there it is. Happy Year of the Snake. Let's enjoy this rain, and blessings.